Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. We're going to have a look at how surveyors can interpret the calculations and measurements that they make into an assumed curve of the surface of the Earth, assuming that we are on a spherical Earth rather than a level Earth. So it's really important before we get into this to point out a couple of things. Surveying and surveying equipment like theodolites and these sticks that you're seeing is used usually for construction and across short distances. Surveying is never used to measure or assume any distance to the observable or visible horizon. That never comes into any part of the surveying equations. Although, of course, we do know that this horizontal line of sight is used. And, of course, the plumb lines are, of course, used when you set up the theodolite and, of course, when you make these measurements either side, as you can see here on this illustration. But you can see that this assumes those poles or measuring sticks are pointing towards the center of a spherical Earth. And this is because the angles that they measure will often turn out to be greater than 180 degrees. So it would appear that the angles they measure go below this line of sight, indicating that there is some kind of curvature. But again, keep in mind that surveyors are not measuring or using the horizon as a reference point. They are using sticks, physical, tangible objects that are not too far away, but of course will change in angular size, even though they don't change in physical size the further away they get. And so what's actually happening is we have perspective being converted into an assumed curve of the Earth. Another thing to point out here is, of course, we are looking at this situation here where we have a theodolite in the middle and we have these points A and B. This is not the view that we actually see. This is the view that is interpreted from the measurements made at point A and point B and in between. So the surveyor who gets these kinds of results has never actually looked at it from the perspective that we are seeing it now, this side-on view, as it were. So, yeah, all of this is interpretation of what the surveyor sees or records. And again, the surveyor is basing everything on the horizontal line of sight from the theodolite, whatever point that might be, and then referring to the tangible measuring sticks, not the horizon. Okay, so it's important to be really clear about that surveyors are measuring tangible objects at close range. The horizon has never ever been considered part of surveying, and it's never ever considered a tangible object in any surveying or even observations. Yeah, so let's just have a look at what it actually says here, and just to be clear what they are talking about, and I'll show you another example of some actual measurements that someone's done. So leveling is the process of determining the elevation of a point relative to another point. So yeah, point A, point B. Okay, again, these are represented with physical, tangible sticks with numbers and colors on them so you can see clearly. All right, so the curvature of the Earth affects the results of leveling. There are techniques and formulas to correct the effect of Earth's curvature. All right, so to measure the elevation of B relative to A surveyor will usually position the level in the middle, take a reading back to A, back sight, and then take a reading forward to B, foresight. Okay, remember, the surveyor is not seeing this view that we see here. The surveyor is standing there with his theodolite and the plumb line going straight down there, And of course, what you have here is from point A to point B along this horizontal line of sight is going to be 180 degrees, isn't it? So if you had a vertical plumb line here from a theodolite to point B, it's going to be 90 degrees. And then going the other way to the back sight, to A, is going to be another 90 degrees. So you get this 180 degrees. And, you know, of course, this is that horizontal line of sight that is the base of that 180 degrees. So, of course, if the surveyor makes an observation or a measurement of the stick in the distance appearing to be lower than this horizontal line of sight representing 180 degrees, then of course you're going to get this result, which is more than 180 degrees. So, you know, the surveyor's line of sight has to go down from the horizontal, and this would appear to be a measurement or observation or a calculation of curvature in the distance from the middle. Yeah, it's very simple, really. Obviously, the calculations take time, and they are, you know, they're very precise. But essentially, that's all that's going on. We've got this horizontal line of sight that represents the horizon or the surface. They're not actually measuring the surface. They are just measuring across this line of sight, and then any difference that is going on above or below that line of sight. So we'll see how that actually, you know, why that's wrong to assume in the first place anyway as any kind of physical measurement of elevation. So they say, it goes on to say here that the procedure is done to cancel out the effect of Earth's curvature and refraction. If they were to position the level on A and take a reading directly to B, the result will have larger errors from both factors. Well, that's for sure. If you put that theodolite over here at point A, you've got a much greater distance to point B. And of course, the tiniest movement of the theodolite or its angle up and down will, of course, create this increase over distance of any kind of error. So yes, of course, the further something away is, the more difficult it is to make those very finely tuned measurements, because there's just very little in between them. And eventually you get to the point where you just cannot make any changes. Everything's just too far away. So at the bottom here it says, flat earthers assume that construction works like roads, bridges, railways, etc. are built without accounting for the Earth's curvature. They are wrong. The levelling operation in such works is done by accounting for Earth's curvature. Okay, again, they're not actually measuring any curvature on the surface of the Earth. They're accounting for it, or this spherical nature of the measurements that they're making, and it's basically the same as perspective. So let's have a look at what is sometimes shown. I'm sorry, I can't remember the site this is from, but this is from a surveyor who's done his own measurements, and in his mind, those measurements are being done over a spherical Earth, because you know, again, whatever the results are, what this surveyor measured or calculated or interpreted from these measurements was that you had these points going, you know, that the angles and the turnings that were done added up to more than 180 degrees. So again, going, you know, we've got these points going below this visual line of sight. So of course, it's all this assumption. Again, we're not seeing this view. We're not seeing this side-on view. We are not seeing these plumb lines do this. The plumb lines are being interpreted as doing this because something further away is going to be lower than the visual line of sight, as illustrated here. So you then can make this illustration and assume that those plumb lines are, you know, diverging or converging as they go down towards the center of a spherical Earth, or diverging as they come up out of it. Yeah, again, it's all just interpretation. And so what I'm showing here is there isn't any disagreement with the figures that are obtained. But again, remember that the surveyor is looking at these physical markers. Just go back to this. Oops, sorry. Yeah, tangible physical markers which will appear to slightly different as they get into the distance. Okay, the surveyor is never actually referencing the horizon in the distance. All they're doing is referencing this horizontal line of sight, which essentially is the same as the surface that they are standing upon, and it's level. And so let's see how that interpretation is made, and really how simple this all is. So excuse the ugly mug here. Someone just took this picture of me when I was on the beach and then sent it to me. But the important thing to notice here is, of course, the horizon in the background. And so from this, we know that the photographer's line of sight, the center of the photographer's field of view, was right here, where we can see the horizon. We know that because I'm fairly close to the camera, we can see that the camera's line of sight was directed at around my neck there. Okay, and of course we've got this horizon in the distance, and we know that if the photographer had raised the camera, then the horizon behind me would appear even higher. And if the photographer's line of sight, horizontal line of sight, was above my head, then the distant horizon would also be above my head. So of course this simple fact alone tells us that you can't, it's the horizon isn't fixed, it's not tangible. I'm this kind of tangible object, just like one of those surveying sticks. Yeah. So if you just remember that, again, the surveyor and the photographer have got a very similar view. The photographer is looking at me, and the background is kind of irrelevant. It's not part of the equation. The horizon in the distance isn't part of the surveyor's equation. It is, where is this line? Where is this pointing at on the physical object, which happens to be me? Yeah. So of course that is the view. And again, what happens is we get this interpretation of the view. There's the theodolite looking at a tangible object, just like the photographer was looking at me. That image, that measurement, that calculation made from the theodolite is translated into this view that we never see. Yeah, the same here. So all right. There's the photograph that was taken. So let's now do a side-on view of what was happening as this photograph was taken. So it's kind of quite simply, let me just turn off that a minute. This is a side-on view of the photographer taking my picture on the beach, and it's the same as a surveyor with a theodolite making measurements with the surveying sticks, measuring sticks that are used. So you can see here that the photographer's line of sight is around there, around about there. It doesn't really matter. I'm close enough to the camera to not be too far away that we can really kind of get a spot on. It's quite accurate there that we can see the camera's right there at the neck. And of course, what's happening in the photograph is that the photographer's line of sight is creating a horizon in the distance. That's where the horizon is in the photograph for the photographer. Not for us here, not for us looking at this scene. Our horizon will be at our eye level. And of course, again, it's important to remember that this scene can be any way round. The photographer can be looking at the subject from any angle, and the horizon will always be up around that the subject's neck area at the same eye level as the photographer. Yeah. So of course, what I've got here is the surface there, just the actual surface. But of course, in the photograph, we see the surface appearing to rise up to the horizon. And of course, everything in the sky is also coming down to the horizon. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's, again, this is just an interpretation, yeah, of what we are seeing in the photograph. And we are pointing out or recognizing that the horizon in the photograph is at the same level as the photographer, but it's not being used as a tangible reference, just like the horizon is not used as a tangible reference in surveying. The object in front of them is used as a tangible reference. So, of course, what will happen next is there's me, 6 foot something. Oh gosh, hang on. Whoa, sorry. There's me, 6 foot something, and I'm quite close to the photographer. So, of course, if I stood further away, then the line of sight to my neck will go down, and it will go down below this line of sight that the photographer has at the moment. So we can illustrate that in this side-on view by having a mini-me over there. We know that this reduction in angular size, the photographer stays where he is, but then, the person or the object or the stick that was right in front of the photographer here is taken further away into the distance, and of course will appear now below the photographer's line of sight. Yeah. So, of course, at the same time, it's coming up here as well. It's as if that person has become elevated in the distance as well, simply because of the way perspective works. Yeah, and the further away you can see something further away is going to, the further away something gets, the higher up in the photograph it will actually appear. But of course, it's not getting any higher, it's not getting any lower. It will stay on its level plane, just as I do as well. So, of course, in reality, my physical size wouldn't change, but in the eyes of the photographer, it would change, and I would appear to be, down here once I got further away. So that's really simply how it works, because ultimately, if you're using a theodolite, let me just try and do this, then as I pointed out, then the line of sight is going to be lower than this horizontal line. So remember, we've got the 180 degrees here because you're going from point A to the midpoint and then to point B. So you've got this 90 and 90 making 180 degrees. This is your baseline for the 180 degrees. The line of sight, not the horizon. Just so happens that the horizon becomes the same as the line of sight. But you can see here that this person, and in this case it was me, wouldn't change in size. I would just change in apparent size. So from the perspective of the person with a theodolite here, just like a camera, this would go down. The angle would be lower than the original horizontal angle. And so, of course, what's happening then is that change in the angle is being interpreted as this plumb line that's not the true vertical that it is. And of course, you've got this assumption that the horizontal plane goes all the way up here. So this, you can see what's happening here is this assumption of a horizontal plane is getting further and further apart from the visual line of sight. So of course that translates into a drop, as I showed here, a drop, yeah, from the line of sight. That's all it is. So again, there is no contesting the numbers. I'm sure the maths is very accurate and you're getting very accurate results. But of course, the results are result of perspective. This sphere of perspective that ends up giving you this interpretation of a geoid, or what they call geodetic surveying, the assumption that we're on a spherical Earth with plumb lines that converge at the center of this said spherical Earth. But it's just a model. It's just an interpretation. This is what we actually see. And this is how we can interpret what we see, because in this case we are taking perspective into account. The curvature, this drop and this difference of 180 degrees, is not anything to do with the surface. It's to do with what the surveyor sees through their surveying equipment when they are looking at a tangible object, not at the horizon and not referencing the horizon, but referencing their own line of sight, horizontal line of sight. And so the plumb line, this 90 degrees, never changes. It's still 90 degrees. This guy isn't leaning over, and it's not leaning over like this. Yeah, the plumb lines are vertical and they go straight down. They don't converge or diverge, but the difference that we can calculate from the apparent convergence or divergence is this. It's perspective. All right. So that's how you know that perspective is the imaginary curve. And even when surveyors are making measurements, they are doing so with tangible objects, not against the horizon. All right. Hope that helps. Thank you very much.
Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.